Okay, well, I'm Forrest Morgan. I am professionally, I'm twice retired. I spent 27 years in the Air Force, retired a few years ago, went to work at the RAND Corporation, which does strategy research for the Department of Defense and the military services in the United States. I did work there for about 16, 17 years and retired again from them last year. And now I'm just writing, and I teach also at Carnegie Mellon University. I teach strategy-related courses there. I practiced martial arts for about 30 years. I had about 20 years of experience when I wrote Living the Martial Way. I trained another 10 years after that. I have since had to stop doing that because of my advancing age and my arthritis. I had degenerative arthritis, so I can't do martial arts anymore. I still take pride in living a warrior lifestyle, though. Living the martial way, living a warrior lifestyle is a lot more than martial arts. Martial arts are an important part of it for those of us who practice the arts, but it's broader. It's a lifestyle. It's the pursuit of excellence. It's the pursuit of learning how to live up to your obligations in life, to your country, to your family, et cetera, et cetera. And I still consider myself a warrior. As I said, I spent 27 years in the Air Force. I spent another 16 years doing strategy research for the nation. And I continue to write and publish on strategy-related issues. Even though I have arthritis, I work around it to stay in shape. I exercise regularly. I keep as fit as I possibly can. And that's where I am in life now. Well, I think it's very important right now. As I mentioned in the book, a lot of people who practice martial arts are hobbyists. They do it as a hobby. They do it a couple of nights a week or something like that. And other nights they do other things, and they don't think about their martial arts that much when they're not training. And so when something like the COVID crisis occurs, it's easy for them to just stop doing it because, well, it's dangerous to go into the dojo or to the training hall and practice with other people, and they don't know what else to do other than, when they were going to class and doing what their instructor was telling them, when actually there's an interesting parallel that occurred to me as you talk about the COVID crisis and the fact that we all are separated now to a great extent. Is that's much the way it was in various places in Asia where they practiced martial arts, where they had to do it secretly because it was prohibited. What comes to mind, of course, is Okinawa during the Satsuma occupation, when they were prohibited from having weapons and practicing martial arts, and the origins of Okinawan karate, where they practiced secretly on their own, often or most of the time by themselves, doing kata, doing forms, pounding their fist on the forging post, and staying in shape and developing their fighting skills. But they had to do it alone, and they had to do it at night in secret, so they weren't caught by the Japanese authorities. Interesting parallel there to the COVID crisis. We're not prohibited from doing it now as much as for our own safety, we have to avoid large groups and avoid close contact where we would pass on infection. It leaves us to train those people who are continuing to train on our own. As I said, I try to stay in shape, and before the COVID crisis, I was in the gym 4 to 5 days a week for 2 hours at a time with cardio training and weight training, resistance training, and the like. And with the crisis, of course, gyms are some of the prime areas of infection in the United States because of so many people being together and breathing so hard. And so we've had to, for several months, my wife and I stopped going to the gym. So I had to find other ways to stay fit. And we walk over an hour a day together, a brisk walk every morning. When I couldn't go to the gym, I was then doing push-ups and sit-ups and other pull-ups, other exercises that I could do at home and by myself. we're in a situation now in my area in the United States where the infection rate's very low. So the gyms have reopened, but with a lot of restrictions. And we have to mask up, and I go to the gym, avoid getting close to people, but still walk briskly every morning for my cardio training and do resistance training at the gym. If you're a warrior, if you live that lifestyle, it's not a matter, well, I can't do it now because of this. You say, well, this is a new challenge. How am I going to do it now is the question. I've got to stay fit. I've got to stay trim and strong, and I've got to stay ready for whatever life throws at me. And, right now it's thrown us the COVID crisis, and we have to deal with that and work around it. Well, I was teaching martial arts throughout the 80s. And being a military person, I would be in one station for two or 3 years and then be reassigned. And I would always have a class, and as it got close to where I had to be transferred elsewhere, my students began to get concerned and really disappointed. I mean, there's a lot of martial arts in the United States, but most of it is fairly shallow, teaching movements and stuff without the instructors not understanding the philosophies behind it and what the martial way is and stuff. And I had been researching it for years, and I taught in my classes, when I taught Taekwondo, Chongdokwan, I taught in my classes the deeper meaning of things, and I taught the martial way, and my students said, you're leaving. Where are we going to get this? There isn't anybody else around here who knows this stuff. And where are we going to go? You need to write a book. And they kept saying that. And for a couple of years, I said, I don't think I have enough here to write a book. I've learned some things over the years, but there's not enough here for a book. But then I started sitting down. I was at work. I was on night shifts at Headquarters Air Force Space Command, and sitting there thinking, let me start making some notes. And I started making notes and divided into groups, into chapters. And I said, well, maybe I do have enough for a book. And so I took that on and wrote that book in the 1990-91 timeframe, and it was published in 92. That's a really good question, because a couple of people have asked me that question in the past in interviews, and also a number of people have asked, am I going to do a revised edition, a second edition, and bring it up to date or something, which has led me to think about that. What would I change if I did a revised edition? And most of the central core material, I think, is pretty solid, fairly consistent. I would acknowledge and talk about the changes in the martial arts world globally since I first wrote the book, which includes some of the things you've talked about. I would mention some of the pleasant experiences I've had in terms of discovery that there were a lot more people in the United States anyway, and with you as an example, perhaps worldwide, who thought the way I did. That when one of the things that made the book successful, and it was a very successful book, was that it resonated with a lot of people who were looking for traditional martial arts and looking for the deeper philosophy. And so when the book went out, a lot of those folks, particularly back in the 90s when it was new, a lot of those folks contacted me, and I discovered there are a lot of really good martial artists in this country, and I was very flattered that they were very pleased with the book and impressed with the book. And so I would talk about that a little bit more, that there is a network, and perhaps now that we have a World Wide Web and we're all connected in certain ways, perhaps we have a much more connected network of traditionalists in the world practicing martial arts. And I wasn't the lone voice in the darkness that I thought I was when I first wrote the book. There are a lot of really good traditionalists out there. And so I would talk about that a little bit. Some of the things I would do in a revised edition, is I would fix at least one area that I really got wrong in the book, I think. And that was when I was talking about nutritional advice and things like that. And I had read some books at the time about high carb diets and how good they are for you. And so I wrote about that in the book, and I thought that I had good, reliable sources. And it turns out it was flaky stuff. It was a fad diet. It's really unhealthy. And I really worry about people reading my book and following unhealthy diet advice. So one of the things I would probably do if I did a revised edition is I would stay more in my lane, so to speak. I would not talk nearly as much about things I really don't know about, but think I know about maybe. I would certainly correct the dietary information, the physical training information, and explain to readers there's some very good books out there and there's some very good material out there. And basically with diet, follow the nutritionalist's guide, the professionals who tell you to eat a balanced diet, limit your fats, but also limit your carbs, and just follow a solid, balanced diet, and you'll be healthier than if you go on any of these fad diets. But yeah, over the years I've discovered a few things, nits here and there that I didn't get quite right that I would fix. But I would say 90% of the book I feel confident with, even 30 years later, or nearly 30 years later now, that I was pretty solid on the core material. I think the short answer is sport competition. We've become so obsessed worldwide with sport competition, and that was one of the central themes of Living the Martial Way, is what everybody thinks is martial arts. Most of it is not. It's combative sport. It came from martial arts sometime back in history, but they started playing it as a game. They started competing, at first in all innocence, to attract students and to entertain students, give them something fun to do. Doing forms over and over and over is something that most people won't do, doing solitary forms. But people are naturally competitive. So, training hall instructors and stuff began setting up contests in training hall to entertain students and to let them practice their techniques against actual resistance. But that became, over time, the central drive of most martial arts organizations now. You went from the training hall to tournaments, and now the big, extravaganza events and the leagues and the whole thing. And as a result, what people want to learn is how to win the contest, which means technique. It's not how to learn the martial way or learn the things that the martial arts were devised to teach. It's not even self-defense for the most part. It's how to win that contest within a specified set of rules in that controlled environment, which is not realistic to the street to begin with, and is not the martial way, and does not require strategy. It just requires technique and tactics. Okay, so as I talked about in Living the Martial Way, there's strategy and there's tactics and there's technique, and they're all important. They're all important. But you need to start with strategy, a broad strategy of what you want to achieve in life, and not just martial arts, but in life, and then how to shape your life to shape toward that strategy. And part of that, those objectives in life, might include being able to defend yourself, protect your family. Well, if that's the case, then what are the threats? What are the objectives? And then what tactics and techniques do you need to defend against those specific threats? You start from the top down, not from the bottom up. And I'll tell you, Carlos, that I am now working on a book specifically about that. That section of Living the Martial Way, that chapter on strategy, I'm fleshing out into an entire book, okay? And we're marketing it now. My literary agent is as we speak, talking to publishers and looking for a publisher. It's about 70% written, and I've got about 7 chapters in first draft. Okay, which doesn't mean it's coming out next week or perhaps not even next year. You know, developing a book and getting it published and going through the editorial process and the publications process and everything is a long drawn out thing. But the tentative title we've got for it is The Fighting Advantage. And then the subtitle is something like Strategy in Military Close Combat, Police Defensive Tactics, and Personal Self-Defense. And the theme of this book is that you don't just take up a martial art to learn self-defense. You have to decide, as I was saying a few minutes ago, you have to decide what your objectives are and what your constraints are and what your threats are. And that's very different from military people on the battlefield compared to police officers who have a very different task compared to private citizens who want to defend themselves. Each of those groups has different objectives. Each faces different kinds of threats. Each faces different legal constraints, okay? And you have to start with what your objectives are, understand your strategic environment, and then choose what techniques and tactics you need to learn to be able to achieve your objectives, whether it's mission objectives, military objectives, whether it's police objectives, or whether it's personal self-defense. And I take readers step by step through that process and relate it to the ancient writings. I talk about Sun Tzu, I talk about the Western military theorist Karl von Clausewitz, I talk about military theory, and I discuss with anecdotal stories, much as I did in Living the Martial Way, my experiences in learning all of this over my experience of strategic education and strategy making in the Pentagon and so on and so forth. And so that's what this book is going to be about. Yeah, that's a very good question. And I think, one of the things that led me to write Living the Martial Way and write it the way I did, because there's a lot of martial arts books out there, as you know. And I had bought and read and looked at a lot of them. And as I mentioned, I think, in the introduction of Living the Martial Way, most of those martial arts books out there are essentially instructional picture books. They're teaching you how to do a block and they're teaching you how to do a punch and stuff. And you and I both know that's very difficult to learn just from reading a book. You need a competent professional instructor to actually correct your position, your form, teach you how to move and so on and so forth, which, even in a book with still photographs, it's very difficult to grasp. And so as I wrote Living the Martial Way, I decided right from the beginning, this isn't going to be an instructional picture book because there's plenty of those out there. We don't need another one. I want to try to inspire my readers to go out and find good instruction and learn the martial arts and do it the right way. And have I been successful? How successful have I been in doing that? I think I've been more successful in doing that than most authors of martial arts books because of the limitations of those books. My approach in trying to inspire people as opposed to trying to show them individual techniques, I think is much more doable from a book than teaching technique. Oh, geez. Let me think. I'm going to turn, actually, my martial arts books are in that direction, on that wall. Most of the stuff back there is military history and political science and the like, related to my career. As I think about martial arts books, I think, thinking back, and to be frank with you, since I'm not active in the martial arts right now, I haven't really read martial arts books for quite a few years now. I retired from the training hall when I retired from the Air Force about 18 years ago. So I'm not current on the recently published martial arts books, but I'll say that the martial arts books that I found the most helpful, the most inspiring, were the ones by the classical masters. guys like Funakoshi, his books, and not so much the pictures and the techniques, but reading what he had to say about it. Books by Oishiba himself, books by Masoyama, who was talk about hardcore. That guy was crazy, and crazy in a good way, as a totally dedicated martial artist. When they asked Masoyama how much you should train in the martial arts, and his answer, you should train more than you sleep every day. And so, that's pretty extreme. None of us, no normal people that have families and jobs can do that. But those are the kind of books that I found the most inspiring, is books by the true masters, the classical masters, who had interesting viewpoints, they had insight into the martial way and not just the martial arts they were trying to describe. Some of the very good academic work of that era, of maybe a few decades ago, is stuff by Don Draeger. His books, and he had several. He had a series of Budo and Bujitsu books, the classical Bujitsu, classical Budo, and modern Budo and Bujitsu, which is very good as far as kind of cataloging all the Japanese martial arts of that day. And then he had a few other odds and end martial arts books that he put out. But Draeger was a true warrior who understood the martial way and was also very educated and articulate, and wrote very well as well. I don't know if you're familiar with Don Draeger, but books by people who really know what they're talking about, the classical masters, the well-educated martial artists who take this stuff very, very seriously, and do a lot of research and learn the real thing, as opposed to people who go out and get a black belt in karate or something and decide, well, I'm going to write a book, and don't know anything more than the next guy down the street. Well, once again, my knowledge and exposure to this is a bit dated, since I haven't been in training halls in quite a few years. But my aggravation, or one of the things that annoyed me when I was very active in the martial arts and visiting training halls and seeing a lot of demonstrations as well, is trying to demonstrate ki or chi, instructors or supposed masters trying to convince their audience that I have ki, I have chi. And I've met people that do, as I mentioned in the book, I've met people do all kinds of things which really amount to circus tricks. The unbendable arm thing that some Aikido people like to do. I've got a friend, that I've known since our teen years, who's a lifelong martial arts practitioner, but early in his martial arts career, he was involved in this organization where they believed they could make their body so hard with ki that they could take any blow and not be injured. And he used to come and visit me at my house, and he says, I'm getting stronger, I got more ki. And he says, let me show you. And he bend over and he says, hit me with a Shugyo on the back of my neck. You're crazy, I'll kill you if I really hit you. And I would humor him a little bit by hitting, thumping him a little bit, using and all this silly stuff. And it was all make believe, it was all pretend. The thing, I still think one of the things I've changed in my attitude over the years a little bit is I'm less mystic now, if there's any way to describe it. When I wrote Living the Martial Way, I was much more intrigued with mystical concepts like ki and chi and some of those. And I still, think that that some true masters have insight into those things and have a handle on that in ways that some of the rest of us do not. But it's so overhyped, and so much of it is just parlor tricks and circus tricks that that's the one concept I think that I would be most skeptical of in today's martial arts world.
Probably that's, if I have to acknowledge something to what we were talking before, the UFC and these sort of back to the nitty gritty, crude objective of martial arts. You know, stronger man, last man standing sort of way. If something good came out from that, is this, you know, it's like now all these key masters are very quiet now because they need to prove it in reality. So maybe
when
I haven't seen them.
When the competitive world went to full contact contests as opposed to controlled contact or light contact sparring tournaments, a lot of these key guys really backed off and stopped bragging the way they were. Some of the first exposures we saw was when Muay Thai, when Thai boxing hit the scene back in maybe the 90s, when it got exposure in the United States and worldwide. And there was this famous, argument between some supposed kung fu masters in China who said, well, we can beat those guys. We've got chi, we've got, all these secret deadly techniques, and say, we just can't use them because they're so deadly that, we would get in trouble. And the Thai boxers challenged them, and they had a series of matches. And, the Thai boxer knocked them out in the first 30 seconds and everything. And after the first match, as I recall, after the first session and the Kung Fu masters went away embarrassed, they came back and said, verbally said, well, that's because we couldn't do our most deadly techniques, eye stabs and that sort of thing. We had to restrain ourselves from the real techniques we would use in actual combat. And the Thai boxer said, well, let's do it again. And no rules. You don't need any rules. And they came back, they tried it again, and the same result. They knocked the Kung Fu guys out right away. If anything is good come from the competitive sport world, is that perhaps with the full contact, closer to actual fighting type of contest, it's really put a damper on some of the mystical claims of some martial artists. I think perhaps it's relevant for helping manage the very problem you're talking about. Is once again, when I wrote Living the Martial Way back in the 1990 timeframe, my frustration is so many people expected instant gratification from the martial arts. One of my frustrations, certainly not the only one. And you could go out to, we didn't have the term McDojo back then, but we had those kind of businesses out there that, you sign a contract and you'll be a black belt in a year and so on and so forth. And, what I wanted to emphasize to people is that living the martial way is a lifelong commitment. It's not a hobby, it's not a sport, and it's not something that gives you immediate gratification returns. It's something you have to devote yourself to and commit to, and you never achieve perfection, but that's what you're grasping for. That's what you're reaching for constantly and trying to get better and better and better and learn more and more, become a stronger and more fulfilled person with everything you do. And so, a martial arts book today, that's what it should strive to help people understand, that this is a way of life. If it's a martial arts book about the martial way, now there are martial arts books about sport, there are martial arts books about personal combat. I mean, I don't talk about this in the book I'm working on right now. I talk about, learning methods of combat, developing strategy for military combat or police defensive tactics or personal self-defense that is as quick and efficient as possible, because you have to be quick and efficient. You don't have years and years and years to produce a soldier, or years and years and years to produce a competent police officer. It's got to be efficient training, and the techniques themselves, the tactics especially, have to be very direct. It's not going to be a long type of thing. So I don't talk about this lifelong commitment stuff in the book I'm working on now, but if it's a book about the martial way, that is the martial way. It's a lifelong commitment. It's not immediate gratification. And it won't appeal to everybody because most people want instant gratification. But all I can do is talk to the world and hope that enough people will be interested and inspired by it, that they'll get on the true path. I would say that a martial arts book in this day and age, that's all the more need to be inspirational to keep pressing on in any way you can. Keep your physical fitness up, keep your stretching up, keep your resistance training up, and pardon me. And if you're in those arts that have forms, if you're in a karate art or something like that, as we started off in this interview talking about the old days in Okinawa, there's so much you can do by yourself anyway, because that's how that art developed. So ideally, a book would inspire people to find the things they can do safely while we all wait out the crisis, whether you want to call it a crisis or wait out the situation. Sooner or later, we're going to have vaccines and we're going to be past this. This won't last forever. And the thing is, you got to keep up your warrior spirit and not give up during the time when you're prohibited from doing a lot of the things you'd really like to do. And maybe the role of a book is help to inspire people to keep on keeping on, to press on.
So, Mr. Morgan, thank you very much. Please take care, stay safe, and it was a pleasure. It was a pleasure, really.
I've enjoyed it. Thank you very much for doing this.
Thank you very much, and take care.
Okay, bye-bye.